What's up, guys? Thanks for joining another episode of Cars, Bikes, and Coffee, where we like to save and restore cars. My name is Kurt, and we are working on a 1992 Nissan 300ZX Twin Turbo. And today what we need to do is a bunch of little things, and that's going to help us get it closer to being able to pull into the garage and work on it, as opposed to being outside, where currently, being winter, and yes, in California, it's cold, it's wet outside, it's windy, and I'd rather be in the shop or a garage, right? So what we need to do is take some parts. We're going to take them apart, paint some of them, clean, just kind of go through, make sure we have all of our, seals. We need to rebuild some brake calipers. So let's get into it. So looking at the intake plenum, what I want to do now is go ahead and take off the throttle bodies, the linkage, and all the miscellaneous little parts, the two PCV valves, control valve, and the regulator. Get those off so we can clean the plenum up and give it a paint. And then cleaning up the throttle bodies and the linkage and all these small parts. And I want to go ahead and remove the coolant lines that run under and through the plenum, just to alleviate any potentials for leaks. So we'll start removing all the parts, getting it ready to paint. Now we do have the bolt kit from Z-Spec Design, so we're going to be able to replace all the throttle body and linkage bolts and plenum and really dress up the look of the engine. Now, one of the things I'm doing is on these small bolts, I'm just putting them back in on some of these brackets. That way I can go back right before we paint, see if they're in the set of from Z-Spec or if I just need to go replace them. So now what we want to do is take off these coolant lines and these hoses and take off these sensors, and as well pull out the PVC valves. We have replacements for those. So let's go ahead and clean this up. And for the coolant lines and hoses, I'm going to remove these screws permanently and just bag them and put them away. All right, so now the plenum is stripped. We've got all the parts off. We've put the bolts back in that we're going to keep. And so now we can clean this up and get it ready to paint. We're also going to clean up this corrosion on the AAC valve and the regulator, and just make this look a little cleaner and a little better. We're going to go ahead and clean with the pressure washer the intake plenum. So now we've got everything really cleaned up. I got a few little bits that I want to make a little bit cleaner, but we need to get most of this stuff ready to be repainted. And so I've got the intake plenum taped off, ready to get primered. We actually have decent weather now, so I can start to get some paint on these pieces. So that's what we're going to do next. Going to do it off the camera, and then when we come back, we'll have all nice painted parts.
One eternity later.
All right, so we've been working off camera on getting all of our parts painted and cleaned up and all ready. We've got the plenum painted. We've got brake calipers for the front all painted. Take a look. They came out pretty good. And they're all cleared and high heat. And then, of course, we got new rear rotors that are painted. I still have to remove my tape. And then all the little miscellaneous parts are painted, and the rear calipers in there. So before we pull the valve covers off for paint, what I want to do is go ahead and pull the fuel rail and clean that up, and also replace the fuel hose. So I'm just going to bust out these bolts. and hopefully it comes out. We pulled the injectors, and after pulling one of the rails apart, we've got the Nismo 555cc injectors. So what we want to do, and they all test out as far as impedance, and just looking across the two connections, just to making sure we're in range and they work. So what we want to do is clean these and then back flush them, and probably flush them, go back and forth, get them really nice and clean. We've got new seals for them, so we'll get those back installed and we'll keep moving on. All right, to start, what we want to do is take, of course, the injectors off, and some of these will probably come loose, some will not. So we'll have to use one of our suggestion tools. And we're going to be replacing these with some Allen key bolts, so we're not too concerned about saving them. So just going to go ahead and try, I know this one is loose, and remove all the screws. And it looks like I'm going to have to use a vice grip. Oh, on most of them. Now with this bolts out and the injector caps off, we need to basically press out these injectors. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to take a couple of the used bolts, put them back in as even as you can get them. And then I've got a socket, and I'm using a 7/16, and basically it's going to sit around the pintle of the injector, so it sits on that seat. Take one of the injector caps, basically make a mini press out of this. Open up the vise. And I'm just going to put some light pressure and gradually increase it until I see the injector start to go. So now that we have that one out, we'll go ahead and do the same with these two, and then go ahead and start cleaning things up. All right, so now that we have the fuel rail basically just in itself, all the the injectors are out, and I'm gonna go ahead and soak it in some, I have Purple Power and some water, and I'm just gonna soak it in here and let it soak for a while. And then on the fuel injector caps, I'm gonna do a little bit on the ultrasonic cleaner, and then probably polish these up, because these have some corrosion, and you can kind of see they've got some oxidation, so I just want to knock that down and clean them up. So that's what we're going to do. All right, so we've got our fuel rails all clean, or at least degreased. It would be awesome to replate these. These are a bit large for my tank, and I don't know if I really want to send these off to get plated at the moment, but definitely something, if you're doing it, I would suggest it. We won't really see them that well in the engine bay. They'll be under the plenum and kind of hidden, but they are in somewhat of good condition. There's no rust or anything like that that I'm concerned about, or cracks. So we're gonna run with these. Now, what we do need to take care of are these fuel injectors. They are greasy and dirty, and what I want to do before we start flushing is just to get this dirt and grime off the outer casing of the injector, and then that way we can go ahead and begin to back flush and flush out these injectors and get them back in with new seals. And the way we're going to do that is just use some carb cleaner and a nice little tray, and just go through each one of these and spray the outside really well. Clean the injectors up and got all the grit and grime off of them, and I just took a rubber cap and then the carb cleaner and carefully tightened that to the injector nozzle. And I've got my power supply here set for 12 volts, and I couldn't find a switch, but power supply has a switch. So we're going to carefully connect that to our injector and put it into there. We're going to spray away from the power supply. And yes, the right tool for the right job is always best, but sometimes that doesn't work. All right. So what I'm going to do is turn on the power supply, and then I'm going to give it a few sprays just to back flush the injector. Now that way didn't work very well, so I'm going to try something a little different. On paper it sounded good. So now I've got just some low pressure fuel line. We're going to put it on the pencil, and I've just got a little funnel. And I'm going to load this up. And now, this way I can act as the switch to open and close the injector. And I'm just going to touch the one lead until all of that is gone, and then go through all the injectors. All right, so I went and I backflowed all the injectors, and there was one that when I would touch the contacts, it wouldn't really do much. Like, it would click every once in a while. So I have a jeweler's file, which is just a tiny file, and I'm just cleaning up the terminals. There's a little bit of corrosion or oxidation in there, and just with some contact cleaner, I'm just going and lightly filing those ends just to clean them up. And then we're going to clean it again just to make sure and back flush it and see if that improves. I'm not sure if it's the contacts or if it's the injector itself. Much better. So in this case, thankfully, our contacts were just heavily corroded, and now we're getting good connection. Okay, so now let's talk about flushing these injectors. These are side flow or side fill injectors. You can tell me in the comments below what they're actually called. That was Kurt's name for it. But I can't just simply, like on some injectors where you could just load from the top and spray it out and you're good to go. These, what I'm thinking of doing is putting them back into my rail. We've already cleaned the rail. We're using the old seals, getting them back in, and then capping one end off, loading some pressure with the carb cleaner, and then giving them a little bit of power one by one. And then that way we can see the spray. So what we'll have to do is put 3 of the injectors in each rail and then give it a test. All right, so this is what we've got. We have our fuel rail with our 3 injectors. We've capped one end, and I use my funnel to fill with some carb cleaner. So we're gonna take that out. And I took my compressor, we turned it down really low, probably around 20 PSI. And I'm gonna do 2 things. I'm gonna connect this like so. If I can keep this from falling off the bench. And then I'm gonna connect to my power supply and give each one of these a little voltage to open up the valve. So I'm gonna bring you in so you can see if this even works. Sounds good on paper. We'll test it. All right, so we've got voltage. Just gonna give a little pressure. I made one little change to the setup that switched the sides that I capped. So this side acted like a toilet J-tube, and so the air would get caught when I tried and fill it. So this way I can fill it, get all the air bubbles out, and get more of the carb cleaner out. A little air, a little power, a little carb cleaner. All right, so now we've got all of our calipers painted. The rear ones were not in good condition. Kind of figured these were the originals, and we've got bad seals, so we've got those in, so we're gonna replace those, put everything back together, get the new pads and all the hardware on, and then as well go out to the ZX and get the parking brake shoes and all that hardware installed with new rotors and get these back in. The caliper rebuild was pretty straightforward, nothing special other than one of the calipers had some corrosion because of the seal was actually broken and some water moisture got in there. So it was simply fixed by taking a Brillo pad to the piston and the inside of the cylinder. Replaced all new seals inside and out and got the calipers all set. Disassembled the rear brakes and went, of course, with all new parking brake shoes and new hardware. Greased all the touching points to make sure that that's all covered. And with the hardware, as you know, placing with new springs is always exciting. Put a little bit of anti-seize on the hub. That way, if I need to pull the rotor off or when I need to pull it off in the future, that will make it a little easier. And then, of course, adjusting the parking brake shoes for slight drag and getting the calipers on, getting them connected back to the lines and adjusted accordingly. All right, so the next thing we want to do is, now that we've already got the rear brakes in and assembled, we want to get the front calipers at least assembled. There's a few things, you know, with seals that we're going to do. We're going to have to drop the front subframe and undo the control arms. So I really don't want to put in the calipers just yet, but I do want to assemble them just so I can keep all the parts together. So let's assemble these. All right, so we went ahead and put these together with the pads and all the hardware. So now these are ready to get installed, but we're gonna wait. Like I said, we got some parts to take off the front and some seals. So just to keep these in nice condition, I'm gonna leave them off until we're all done with the engine seals. So we kind of done a lot of housekeeping things on the ZX, and one of the last things is we had a Jim Wolf ECU that was in the car, and none of the stickers were on the chip, and so I had no idea when this ECU was upgraded. I'm assuming at least 20 years ago. So I sent it to Jim Wolf Technologies. They were really cool about checking the chip, and it turned out it was about 25 years ago that this was done. And so they offered to just update it to their most recent program and charged me $100 for it, and then shipped it back. And so we've got that. So excited to get this back in. Before we put it in, there are those wires that I want to go through for the fuel injectors. They essentially ran extra wires to go to the fuel injectors. So I want to test those out when the weather gets a little bit better. But until then, thanks so much for watching. If you guys like what you see, consider subscribing. It does help out the channel. But until then, we'll see you on the next one.